Globally, we would agree that in Western education, there's a formula for success. We could say that when we help students understand their potential and when we encourage their efforts, then we see success. Potential times effort brings success. But as we consider the Indigenous worldview, so different to ours, and their learning styles, I see something missing. I would say potential times effort, and when it's relevant to their context, that's when we see success.
In 2008, the Close the Gap initiative was introduced with 6 key objectives to address the disadvantage faced by Indigenous Australians. The objectives to improve Indigenous education standards included closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous attendance rates, halving the gap in reading, writing and numeracy achievements within a decade, and halving the gap for Indigenous students in Year 12 attainment or equivalent by 2020. The Melbourne Declaration too highlights the need to ensure that the learning outcomes of Indigenous students improve to match those of other students. However, despite the many initiatives and policies, statistics show that the Closing the Gap targets are not on track to be met. The educational gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students has remained the same for the last decade, and Indigenous students are 2.5 years behind their non-Indigenous counterparts. It is obvious that current strategies and practices are failing our Indigenous students. So how do we as teachers help improve the outcomes for Indigenous students? One possible solution is the 8 Ways framework. This is an Aboriginal pedagogical framework that came out of research conducted in Western New South Wales by Tyson, Yunkaporta and Melissa Kirby that is expressed through 8 interconnecting pedagogies using Aboriginal perspectives in teaching methods rather than in teaching content. It enables teachers to both engage with Aboriginal learning processes and provides a dialogue between Indigenous and mainstream pedagogies. Importantly, the 8 Ways framework is a point of entry for developing relationally responsive practices that reflects your school's local Aboriginal community and enables you as the teacher to most effectively engage your Aboriginal students and provide a culturally significant education. The 8 Ways framework is made up of
story sharing. Story sharing refers to the social activity of open and shared dialogue. This way of learning allows Indigenous students to connect and approach knowledge through narrative. Story sharing is effective at engaging Indigenous students as it is central to managing their dynamic connection to country. Traditionally, knowledge would be passed down by elders in the form of storytelling, allowing listeners to make meaning and gain knowledge from stories. Referring to the quality teaching framework, this way of learning shadows the significance dimension with inclusivity and narrative.
community links. This way of learning reflects the importance of relationships, group-oriented practice, and connection to real-life purposes of Aboriginal education. It's about realising the importance of and including local knowledge and understandings, as well as the students being able to apply classroom knowledge in their communities. The quality teaching model echoes this pedagogical approach in the significance dimension through connectedness and cultural knowledge. By incorporating this pedagogy in the classroom, teachers are able to effectively engage with Aboriginal learning processes. Deconstruct, reconstruct. This way of learning recognises the holistic approach taken by Aboriginal students, preferring to master overall concepts and tasks before investigating the steps and sequences. This reflects the key Aboriginal way of learning of watch first, then do, meaning teachers must model tasks and concepts before scaffolding the intricacies and building upon the students' skills. The dimension of intellectual quality in the quality teaching model encompasses this way of learning through deep understanding and substantive communication.
Aboriginal pedagogy consists of non-linear ways of learning and contains indirect rather than direct positioning of new learning concepts. It is important to understand that Aboriginal people think in ways that is not serially or sequentially typical of verbal thinking. In order to effectively communicate new concepts to Aboriginal students, lessons should be conducted to minimise linear perspectives, as it can be seen to prevent the Indigenous from constructing their own identities. For teachers, it is important to find common links between both cultures pedagogically to ensure a non-linear education strategy. Non-linear learning is resembled in all dimensions of the quality teaching model, but is most strongly related to the problematic knowledge, cultural knowledge, inclusivity, and engagement. Landlinks is the method of learning that adheres to the importance and significance of the Aboriginal connection to land. Aboriginal pedagogies are intensely ecological and place-based, drawn from the living landscape within a framework of profound ancestral and personal relationships with place. When conducting lessons for Aboriginal students, it is important to consider this as a part of pedagogy as it provides significance and relevance to Indigenous students. To quote from Aboriginal elders, effective teaching must be pedagogy that takes into account Aboriginal epistemology. Only when this occurs will education for our people be a process that builds on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and identity. In relation to the quality teaching model, Landlinks is a product of the significance dimension as it directly connects with cultural knowledge, inclusivity, and connectedness. Symbols, images, and metaphors are all central to Aboriginal pedagogy. The use of Aboriginal pedagogy utilises all senses to create a symbolic meaning in support of learning new concepts, drawing on both concrete and abstract imagery. The elders of the Kilmaroi people state our thinking is often done in shapes and images. Learning is carried out best by using symbols and diagrams to help us see and remember. In order to effectively communicate concepts to Aboriginal students, the use of symbols should be used. The holistic meaning and connectedness of concepts can be related to symbols of both European and Aboriginal origin. Concepts can be drawn out by referring to symbols which have embedded meaning. The practice makes use of existing Aboriginal culture and can make teaching more effective to these students. Symbols are represented in the significance dimension of the quality teaching model. This path of learning is again present in the elements of inclusivity, cultural knowledge, and connectedness.
Nonverbal. Nonverbal pedagogy is an effective strategy for Indigenous learning. Seeing, thinking, acting, making and sharing without words is a common form of communication within Indigenous culture. Through kinesthetic teaching strategies, such as hands-on tasks, students are able to critically reflect on learning to judge and validate new knowledge. The element of engagement from the quality learning environment dimension in the quality teaching framework is successfully achieved as kinesthetic learning engages students to practically test knowledge through practice and experience. Learning maps. Learning maps create a reference point for Indigenous students and act as anchor points for monitoring their learning. By incorporating visual processes into learning, such as diagrams and scoping sequences, students are able to visualise their learning. Allowing students to map out their learning process in order to achieve a particular goal ensures they remain engaged with the lesson while actively seeking out assistance for successful achievement. This form of pedagogy effectively impacts the quality learning environment dimension in the quality teaching framework. The explicit quality criteria element is experienced as learning pathways and processes are made explicitly visual for engaged students.
The 8 Ways framework is about learning through culture, not just about it, and removing the tokenistic add-ons that are justified as providing Aboriginal perspectives, like dot paintings and popularised dreaming stories. It highlights the significance and sophistication of Aboriginal learning processes and provides an interface between these traditional processes and departmental policies and frameworks. Yunkaporta's studies show that Aboriginal students identified the Indigenous content as a major factor in their behaviour and engagement, and it gave them confidence and helped them believe that they can do the work. The 8 Ways framework is a localised and community-based pedagogical guide, so knowing who to contact and who can assist you in creating a relationship with the local Aboriginal community is vital. It is also important to remember that Aboriginal people are the owners and custodians of their knowledge and culture, and must be consulted when aspects of Aboriginal history and culture are being incorporated into the school curriculum. There are numerous people within schools, department, and state and local Aboriginal Education Consultative Group offices that can assist you in designing your content and practice to best reflect the 8 Ways pedagogy. Good Indigenous pedagogy is right for all students, but not all pedagogy is good for Indigenous students.